I would bet you money that your doctor never told you these common pharmaceutical drugs can contribute to or even cause autoimmune disease. When I was struggling with a life-threatening autoimmune disease, almost everything that my doctors told me about autoimmunity was a lie, and they did not give me fully informed consent about the pharmaceuticals that they had prescribed to me before that autoimmune diagnosis and the pharmaceuticals they prescribed to me for that autoimmune condition. That's why I have dedicated my life to helping autoimmune patients know the truth that they are not going to learn from their doctors or from any source in the medical industry. That's not because doctors are bad people, it's simply because they are not trained how the body works and how the body can heal itself. They are simply trained to suppress symptoms with pharmaceutical drugs and not look at the long-term effects or consequences of that kind of treatment. It is my hope that this information can help you find autoimmune freedom and pharmaceutical freedom just like I did. Before I go further, nothing I share is medical advice. This is just my personal story, my personal research for your entertainment purposes only. The first common pharmaceutical that can contribute to the development of autoimmunity is acid-blocking drugs, like Prilosec, and also over-the-counter acid-reducing drugs as well. These drugs reduce the acid content in the stomach. When we're using prescription acid blockers, that's actually turning off the production of stomach acid, and when we're taking over-the-counter acid reducers and heartburn drugs, what that is just doing is alkalizing the contents of the stomach. It's not actually having an effect on the stomach acid production. The stomach is supposed to be a tank of acid. It's supposed to be very, very acidic to start breaking down proteins and breaking down our food so that it can be further digested in the small intestine. When we don't have enough acid in the stomach, it leads to poorly and inadequately digested food going into the small intestine. Proteins aren't being broken down to the degree that they should by the time they enter the small intestine, and the digestive enzymes can start to work on breaking down the carbohydrates and protein. This process of reducing stomach acid is a cornerstone of disrupting digestion, leading to an overgrowth of pathogenic bacteria, leading to undigested food, and in turn leading to intestinal permeability. We get undigested protein molecules, protein particles, getting unauthorized access, you could say, into the bloodstream. That can lead to antibodies that then attack our own body tissue. You might be thinking, but if I'm having heartburn, I'm having too much stomach acid, so I need to reduce it. No. Heartburn actually results from not having enough stomach acid. Stomach acid is what triggers the esophageal sphincter to close and prevent any of the contents of the stomach from brushing up, kind of coming up and irritating the very delicate lining of the esophagus. So if you're having heartburn, it's actually because you don't have enough acid in your stomach. Stress turns off digestive juice production. So if we're stressed, we're not going to be producing that as much. The second pharmaceutical drug that can contribute to autoimmune disease is ibuprofen. Did you know that this common painkiller is actually shown to create intestinal permeability within 24 hours? So it is opening up essentially the tight junctions in your small intestine where food is absorbed into the bloodstream. But we're not supposed to have high permeability in the intestines. It's supposed to be this gatekeeping system that allows only fully broken down amino acids and glucose into our bloodstream. When we have drugs that are creating more permeability in that intestinal wall, things get unauthorized access to our bloodstream. And then in our bloodstream, our immune system can recognize certain protein molecules as foreign invaders. It can wage an antibody attack on that, and then those increased antibodies can then attack our own body tissue. The next common pharmaceutical that contributes to autoimmune disease is antibiotics. And especially in America, antibiotics are handed out like candy because our medical system was built on a really archaic and primitive understanding of the body, which saw bacteria as something bad, as an invader. But now we know that healthy bacteria actually govern our immune system. Healthy bacteria in our digestive tract help us absorb nutrients, they help us filter toxins, and they actually determine our personality. I can do another video on this because this is mind-blowing, but conditions that the medical system has labeled as mental disorders, like depression, anxiety, ADD, autism, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia. There is no scientific proof that those conditions are mental disorders. And what research is showing us is that those conditions are gut problems. They are digestive problems because they deal with the balance of negative and positive bacteria in our digestive system. So when we take antibiotics, especially repeatedly, we're wiping out all the good bacteria and we're paving the way for an overgrowth of pathogenic bacteria. Unfortunately, antibiotics are often used to treat the symptoms of autoimmune conditions. For example, I had a life-threatening form of ulcerative colitis when I was struggling with autoimmunity, and I was prescribed antibiotics for that. It treated the symptoms temporarily, but what I know now is it actually worsened the condition, and it was one of the reasons I was on the medical conveyor belt for so long. The proper approach here is to help your body build up enough healthy bacteria and prevent the unhealthy bacteria from getting access to the food sources they need. And I talk about this in depth in the autoimmune class. The next pharmaceutical that can contribute to autoimmune disease are antidepressants. Now, this is one of the most commonly prescribed drugs in America. 1 in 4 American women on average are taking SSRI antidepressants. Antidepressants are no more effective than placebo. When we look at studies that are not funded by the pharmaceutical industry, that is the conclusion. And of course, when we look at studies that are funded by the pharmaceutical industry, that's not actually science. That is propaganda disguised as science. It's a very different thing entirely. These drugs are no more effective than placebo, and unfortunately, they correlate to worse mental health outcomes in the long term. And what we also know from about 50 years, 60 years now, of psychiatric research is that depression is not caused by a neurochemical imbalance. I know that is still a shock for some people to hear because that myth, it is a myth, has been so ingrained in our culture, but it's simply not true. In fact, it has been debunked. It is a hypothesis that has been debunked for 60 years now. The root cause of depression and anxiety, according to the research we're doing now, is linked to inflammation. It's linked to gut flora. As I go in depth in the autoimmune class, it is also linked to spiritual issues, okay? So we can't properly address depression as a mental disorder because it's not mental in origin. It's environmental in origin. The problem with antidepressants is that they increase and prolong our tolerance to an unhealthy environment. Autoimmune disease is caused by both an unhealthy inner and outer environment. Your thoughts, your beliefs, your subconscious patterns, trapped emotions, trapped resentments, the stories that you have used to make sense of your life, that's your inner environment. It's also your outer environment. Your location, your toxin exposure, your nutrition, your lifestyle, your nature exposure, the relationships that are in your life. If we find ways to stay in an unhealthy environment longer instead of changing that environment, we can often trigger autoimmune conditions. Is it a healthy thing to prolong and increase our tolerance to an unhealthy environment? It's really, when we look at it, quite like taking a recreational drug. Why do people take recreational drugs? To make them feel better in an unhealthy environment. When their mindset and their lifestyle and their relationships and their values are not healthy, then they often reach for recreational drugs to make them feel better. But it doesn't mean that just because they feel better, those drugs are actually helping them heal and helping them fix the root cause. The last pharmaceutical drug that can contribute to the development of autoimmune disease are vaccines. And I know that's a super controversial topic. The reality is that a lot of people have really heated reactions to discussions about vaccines because their opinions are informed by propaganda and emotion, not by facts. When our opinions are formed by facts, we actually have very rational and calm conversations, and we don't get personally triggered because our identity isn't hooked up to an opinion. There's also a lot of fear-mongering that can happen with vaccine discussions, and I'm going to call them pharmaceutical injections moving forward. From both sides of this discussion, there can be a lot of fear-mongering, and I find this really unfortunate because fear turns off the critical thinking centers in our brain. I want to encourage critical thinking and rational consideration when it comes to these injections and not emotional reactions. So I've put together a free book because I think this information is so important for humanity. It's called 100 Facts Your Doctor Won't Tell You About Vaccines. This is a fact-based approach, so you can see the hidden scientific and historical data about these injections, and it might be really, really eye-opening for you. If you are a person who values having your opinions formed on the proper application of the scientific method, because that's science, then this is going to resonate with you. May I remind people that science is not pharmaceutical marketing that has been disguised as a scientific study. That's just propaganda. That is just a marketing disguise. So we have to do a really deep dive to find what studies are independently funded and what studies have been hidden. I will mention briefly the potential mechanism of action here behind pharmaceutical injections and autoimmune conditions. When we are injecting into our bloodstream a pharmaceutical injection that has genetic material and protein particles in it, we are bypassing the body's gatekeeping system for what belongs in the bloodstream. When things are digested, they are absorbed through the intestinal walls and go into the bloodstream, and ideally, only fully digested molecules like fully broken down starches and sugars like glucose and amino acids go into the bloodstream. Now, when we have injections that are putting genetic material that hasn't gone through that gatekeeping process into the bloodstream, the body can wage an antibody attack on it. For example, egg protein can produce antibodies in your bloodstream to that protein particle, and then those antibodies can go and attack your own body tissue. Another issue is that we're putting adjuvants directly into the bloodstream. Adjuvants are toxic materials designed to elicit an antibody response. The problem is that these adjuvants are toxic. They are things like mercury, which is not so much used anymore, aluminum. A lot of people who are vaccine proponents will say that these ingredients are in such a tiny amount that they don't really impact us because we're exposed to them, for example, by eating tuna fish or environmental mercury or formaldehyde from cleaning sources. But the reality is there is a filter system happening when we take in toxins through the digestive system or even breathe them in. There's more of a filter system going on. When they're directly injected into the bloodstream, they go to the brain, they go to body tissues. It's a really risky business, especially when we look at the necessity of these injections and the usefulness over time. They aren't necessary for human health. They aren't necessary for collective health. If that makes you feel angry or upset, then that's because your opinions on vaccines have been emotionally informed rather than scientifically informed. So I invite you to go check out that fact booklet that I have provided for free. I'm on a mission to help people learn the truth about autoimmunity and how to find autoimmune freedom and pharmaceutical freedom, because they're not going to get this information from their doctors. In fact, doctors can often be the greatest source of medical misinformation when it comes to autoimmune disease. If you want to learn more, if you want my personal help in your autoimmune journey, you can go to autoimmuneclass.com. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.